I'm going to introduce now someone who has been at the conference since the first conference, I think, Bales. He is one of the most respected and authoritative voices in the global fight to end slavery. With 2 Emmys, a Peabody, and a Pulitzer nomination attached to his name. Bales is the co-founder of Free the Slaves, and he is the lead author of the Global Slavery Index. He is also professor of contemporary slavery at the University of Nottingham. And here I want to say hats off. He has just secured £10 million for academic research on modern slavery. He has now 100 researchers in 15 teams which focus on different aspects of slavery, one of them being mental health. So this research will contribute some sorely lacking data to the fight against slavery. It's very important. It will also offer insight into some of the most important and less studied aspects of modern slavery. He needs the best specialists to help him in his research, and I'm very happy to have him here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Monique, very much. I'm very humbled to be here, and not necessarily with the corporations or the NGOs or the very important media people, but with the survivors especially. They are the ones who should have been leading us for a number of years and are now joining us in the front of this. I have a happy job this morning, and that is that I'm going to be talking about upbeat breakthroughs that have to do with the science of slavery. I want to talk about unlocking the science of slavery. And as Monique was talking about the laws, the legal systems that need to be altered, one of the things that's very happy, I think, is the fact that in nature, in physics, in science, we have laws too, but these laws are immutable. They've existed since the dawn of time, and when we can bring them to bear on the crime of slavery, things will begin to happen. I want to talk about a number of breakthroughs. One is that Monique has already mentioned, the fact that for the first time we have a globally agreed methodology, not just a number, but the methodology to achieve a number of the number of people in slavery. And every year that we brought that research forward, our microscope has become much stronger, much more powerful, and we're getting closer and closer to what we believe to be are the true numbers, the baselines upon which we can base a metric for measuring our progress in terms of where we're going. We also have a new breakthrough in terms of understanding the economics of slavery. One of the things that we know has to do with the fact that there has been a collapse in the acquisition cost, a collapse in the price of slaves over the last 50 years. These boys, for example, are hauling stone in Nepal. They're basically like beasts of burden. They are acquired for maybe 5 or 10 pounds worth of money, $5 or $10 worth of money from their parents, who are lured away from it. They're so inexpensive to acquire that when they stumble or fall into a ravine or break a leg or are injured, the slaveholders simply walk away. They understand that it's less expensive to acquire a new child than it is to call a doctor to help the child or to even rescue them. Now, the reality looks something like this, that when we've traced the price of slaves over time, going back in this chart some 2,000 years, we actually see that for most of human history, slaves have been very expensive. They've been capital purchase items, like buying a big piece of equipment or a tractor or something like a lorry. But today, particularly after the advent of the population explosion that began in the 1950s, 1940s, 1950s, we've simply glutted the world with potentially enslavable people. And that means what happens when you glut a market? Prices collapse, and that's exactly what's happened today. So today, while most slaves in the past cost, on an average, and I don't mean the most expensive, but on an average, something like $40,000, 40,000 pounds in the past on average in today's money, today the average cost is around 90 to 100 pounds, $90 to $100. We've had a breakthrough that occurred in this country, which was about using something called multiple systems estimation. This is a nerdy part of my talk. I've got a pretty nerdy bit of content to share with you. But this particular multiple systems estimation allows us for the very first time to measure the number of people enslaved in rich countries. Now that seems odd because rich countries seem like it'd be easy to study, but it's not. Rich countries have fewer slaves per capita. They are better hidden per capita. They are very thinly spread, and they're also just very hard to get. You can't catch them in a random sample survey as we can in many of the developed countries. And what that means is that with this technique, for the first time, we were able to use this technique in the UK and to reach the idea that there are something like 10,000 to 13,000 potential victims of slavery in the UK. This is a number you all know. You just might not have known that we used this new technique that we had brought over from the way it's been used in mass atrocity in the past. Now we have, as well, completed these new studies in the Netherlands, in the city of New Orleans, in Georgia, in the United States, and other European Union and other Southeast Asian countries are also beginning to use this technique. This is exciting for us because this has been an area where we just didn't have solid data, the rich countries, and now we're beginning to achieve that. We've had a breakthrough looking at slavery from space. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site at the bottom of Bangladesh. It should all look like the right, what's on the right of that picture, a dense mangrove forest. This is a very important place in the world because this is the largest carbon sink in all of Asia. This is removing more carbon out of the air than any other place in Asia. But as you can see on the left, something else is going on there. That almost looks like buildings, but in fact, it's fish drying racks serviced by child slaves who have been lured from their families up the river and up higher in Bangladesh. These children are driven. This is a very brave photographer. They got a picture of a modern slave driver driving children up and down the drying racks and beating them. They work at this constantly. They have no escape for the most part, but we have been able to use satellite imagery, search the entire UNESCO World Heritage Site, and reveal 5 previously unknown child slave fish processing camps. Now, the government of Bangladesh is still dragging its feet, and I hope someone can help them to move along, but at least we know precisely where they are and what should be done about them. We also have reached a second stage with our slavery from space work, crowdsourcing. In fact, inviting all of you to help us to use a crowdsourcing platform to help identify the locations on satellite images of brick kilns, and these are brick kilns from space, brick kilns which we know to be in the brick belt of India, Nepal, Pakistan. We know to be high probability areas for slavery. Why is that important? Because A, we've never known how many brick kilns they are. B, we know necessarily where they are in their precise location. And C, the crowdsourcing is actually there to provide the training for an artificial intelligence that will then do the work of actually finding all the brick kilns and telling us exactly where they are. We have had a breakthrough in terms of the way we're now able to layer information. So I appreciate satellites, on-demand data, time series, countings. Let me show you the picture. This is not Brazil. This is, in fact, the Amazon basin. And what we have here is the layering up of information about the protected Amazon forest, which has been a victim of slave-based deforestation in a very intense way. The green parts of this are actually the Amazon forests which have been protected and should not be touched. The yellow parts are, in fact, parts of that protected forest which should not be touched but have now been cut. And as you can see, that's a lot of the forest has been cut illegally, usually using slave labor. Those red lines show the scythe, the blade of slavery and murder, which has been pushing into the Amazon. The Amazon is not destroyed with bulldozers. It's being destroyed with human hands and axes of highly disposable slaves. And the fact that you can see the red dots are murderers and the blue dots are slaves can also show you how once those slaves are used up, they're often simply murdered and buried in the forest that they were forced to cut down. We have a breakthrough now because we're understanding that you can't treat slavery as an individual crime not related to many other things. I've just showed you how slavery is being used to destroy the natural world. It goes further. If slavery, for example, was a state or a country, it would have the population of Algeria. It would be a little bit smaller than, it would be a little bit larger than California, 40.3 million. It would have the GDP of Bulgaria, or strangely, the GDP of the state of Kansas in the United States. Who thought they had $150 billion a year in Kansas? But it would also be, if it were a country, slavery were a country, it would be the third largest emitter of CO2 in the world after China and the United States. Now, I appreciate that comes as a bit of a surprise, but it's all about not factories, but about slave-based deforestation, removing, when you destroy a forest, you create enormous amounts of carbon dioxide, and you also remove the power of the forest to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. We're hoping to create a virtuous cycle, exactly the sorts that Monique have talked about previously, where we use freed slaves to replant the forests that they have been forced to cut, and then use their planting to generate carbon credits on the global financial markets to pay for the work to be done to replant more forests, a virtuous cycle that will return the forests to what they should be. You see, when we unlock the science of slavery, we begin to move from the simplistic, emotive, disparate, disorganized kinds of feelings that we had 20 years ago in this field, and we get to that point where we're working to the immutable laws of science and physics and that transcend, in a sense, the human laws. We have to deal with the complexity, but we do with that through logic, through being unified and being organized. Now, I'll just wrap up by saying, where are we going next? Because I'm really excited. As you can tell, I'm a nerdy guy with where we're going next. Epigenetics of slavery. Toni Morrison, Frederick Douglass, people throughout history have talked about how the experience of slavery affects the minds and the feelings of people who have been enslaved. What we hope to do is to document this in a way that has already occurred for veterans, child abuse sufferers, Holocaust victims, to look very carefully at the differential impacts on the actual physical brains of those who have been caught up in slavery compared to others. We're looking hard at pro-slavery organizations. I don't know if you read Dabiq, which is the magazine, the English language magazine of ISIS. Most of you don't, but it is online, right? And I read it sometimes because it's a very powerful statement of how pro-slavery thinking is going on in the world today. We've got to understand people who are pro-slavery if we're going to undermine them and negate them. So this particular one had a long explanation by the scholars and leaders of ISIS on why God had said it was okay for them to enslave certain people at certain times. We have to understand that thinking in order to dismantle it. We're also trying to understand how slavery is going to play out as we enter the Anthropocene. If you're not familiar with the term, it has to do with the fact that we now live in a world where the great morphological changes, the climate changes, are caused by human beings. This isn't caused by geology anymore. And those charts are all about CO2 use and energy and so forth, species deprivation. All of those things are going to change our lives very, very significantly in the next 20 to 100 years. I'm intending to stay for another 100, by the way. But the key thing is, what will it do to slavery? And what will it do to our work to bring slavery to an end if we have to do so in a world in which the context is very dramatically being altered by the anthropocenic climate change? So, just to wrap and say, at the University of Nottingham, we have the Rights Lab, and it's about 14 teams. Each team is pointing at modern slavery. Mental health, econometrics, supply chains, satellites, you name it, we have teams for each of these and about 125 researchers. We're building a unified research and action plan. We've been needing this for a long time, and all the work and all the plan and all the research is aimed at one thing: bringing slavery to an end. Thank you very much.